We're examining three critical questions that will fundamentally shape the outcome of the U.S. Iran conflict and determine the geopolitical landscape for years to come. These aren't abstract theoretical concerns. They're concrete decisions that will reverberate across the globe. The first question is straightforward but consequential. Will the United States launch a ground invasion? Right now, the U.S. and Israel are conducting primarily an air campaign, striking from a distance. Historically, we'd call this siege warfare. The advantage here is flexibility. As long as this remains an air war, the United States can choose to de-escalate and withdraw from the Middle East. They'd lose the conflict, but the loss wouldn't be catastrophic. A ground invasion changes everything. It would escalate rapidly, and the U.S. would find itself trapped in Iran for 5 to 10 years. That's not a prediction. That's a historical pattern. And here's the critical part. Fighting a ground war requires a national draft. Young men, 18 years old, would be forced into military service and sent to fight in Iran. This isn't theoretical. This is the reality of large-scale ground operations. There's a concept called mission creep that's crucial to understand here. You start with 1,000 troops for a limited objective. It doesn't go as planned, so you send 2,000, then 5,000. Before you know it, you're fully committed. That's exactly how the United States became entangled in Vietnam. One decision leads to another, and suddenly you're in a quagmire that lasts decades. The second major question concerns nuclear weapons. There's legitimate concern that Israel might resort to nuclear strikes because they're dissatisfied with how the conventional war is progressing. They want to reclaim the initiative. Here's what makes this terrifying. Nuclear weapons are a taboo in geopolitics. The United States used them at the end of World War II, and nobody has used them since. That's 75 years of restraint. If Israel breaks that taboo, we're not just talking about a regional conflict anymore. We're talking about potentially entering a nuclear apocalypse. The psychological and geopolitical consequences of that first use would be incalculable. The third question involves the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. This is the third holiest site in Islam, after Mecca and Medina. Muslims believe that Muhammad ascended to heaven from this mosque. Jews believe it sits on the site of their ancient temple, the House of God. Religious extremists on the Jewish side want to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque to rebuild the third temple. If that happens, we're not dealing with a regional conflict anymore. 2 billion Muslims worldwide would be religiously obligated to go to war against Israel. That's not hyperbole. That's religious doctrine. The implications are staggering. So we have three questions: ground invasion, nuclear weapons, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. These three variables will determine not just who wins this war, but what the world looks like afterward. I teach game theory, and game theory allows us to make predictions about human behavior and geopolitical outcomes. Based on my analysis, I'm making three predictions. First, yes, the United States will send in ground troops. Second, no, nuclear weapons will not be used. Third, yes, the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be destroyed. Now, I want to be clear about something. These are educated guesses based on public information and game theory analysis. I don't have inside information. I'm not privy to classified intelligence. I'm working with what's available to everyone. But here's what's important. For my analysis to be valid, I have to be correct on all three. If I miss even one, my entire theoretical framework is wrong. I'm 100% confident that nuclear weapons will not be used in this conflict. If I'm wrong, well, we'll all be dead anyway, so it won't matter much. To understand what's happening, we need to examine some basic geopolitical theory. In military affairs, there's a concept called the escalation ladder. The dominant theory suggests that whoever has escalation dominance, whoever has the most powerful weapons, has the greatest advantage. Israel and the United States have nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't. Therefore, by this logic, the U.S. and Israel should have a huge advantage. But here's what I'm going to show you. This theory is fundamentally incorrect. It doesn't work that way in practice. Let me illustrate with a simple example. Two people get into a fight. They bump into each other. One says, "Say sorry," the other refuses. Neither knows who's actually at fault. They start cursing each other, then pushing, then punching. Eventually, one pulls a knife, the other pulls a gun. The person with the gun shoots. Fight over. But here's what's critical. This fight isn't contained between just these two people. There are spectators watching. There's a crowd. Eventually, the police arrive. The government investigates. For religious people, there's also God. If you die, you have to answer to God about how you died. You have to justify yourself. There are three factors that drive people up the escalation ladder: emotions, power, and reason or logic. What propels people forward is adrenaline. You can't skip steps. You don't go from screw you directly to someone pulling a gun and shooting. You climb step by step because adrenaline is flooding your system, making you angrier, stronger, more resolved. But here's the crucial insight. It's not about how fast you climb the escalation ladder. If you get too angry and overreact, you're at fault. What matters is climbing strategically. When you remain calm and controlled, you gain 3 advantages: focus, clarity, and resolve. You know what you're doing. You have a strategy. You're clear about how to achieve your goals, and you're determined to achieve them. But there's more to consider. It's not just about beating your opponent. It's about justifying yourself to your friends, to the police, and to God. You might win the fight, but end up in prison for 10 years. In that case, you've actually lost. This brings me to the most important principle. Control is more important than dominance. This is a law of escalation. Control is about calibration. Calibration means timing, structuring, and strategizing your response to achieve your strategic objective. You're not just throwing punches randomly. You're throwing a punch in a specific way that allows you to defend yourself, strikes fear in your opponent, and makes you appear as the reasonable party to observers. When the police arrive, you can justify your actions. You don't go to jail. Calibration is ultimately about strategic flexibility. In any conflict, the person with the most options, the most strategies, usually wins. The person with escalation dominance might seem to have the advantage, but they actually have fewer options. They need to maintain credibility. Their power depends on the belief that if you don't obey them, they'll beat you. The moment you demonstrate that being hit by them isn't actually that catastrophic, they lose credibility. They either retreat or escalate to kill you to maintain their image. By calibrating your movements strategically, you can actually manipulate the more powerful opponent into self-destruction. This is the paradox of power. The person with the most weapons often has the least flexibility. They're locked into patterns of behavior because their entire power structure depends on maintaining a certain image. The person with fewer resources but more strategic flexibility can outmaneuver them. This principle applies directly to the U.S Iran conflict. Israel and the United States have escalation dominance through nuclear weapons, but that dominance actually constrains their options. They need to maintain credibility. They need to appear strong. Iran, meanwhile, has strategic flexibility. Iran can choose how to respond at each stage. Iran can calibrate its moves to manipulate the U.S. into overcommitting, into making mistakes, into losing international support. The bully in the schoolyard has more physical power, but the new kid who understands strategy, who remains calm, who calibrates his responses, ultimately wins. The bully is forced into a position where he either backs down, losing all credibility, or escalates to the point of self-destruction. That's the dynamic we're watching unfold in the Middle East right now. This is why my analysis suggests a ground invasion will occur. This is why I'm confident nuclear weapons won't be used. And this is why the Al-Aqsa Mosque becomes the critical variable that determines everything that follows.